Those of you who are able to make it on the Heartspace, thank you again for joining us. Today is January 21st, 2023, and we're continuing with our discovery of this beautiful island of the heart called Archanam in Sanskrit, or deity worship. And this may be our last session on this topic. And I would like to provide some more details and practical details as to how this process of Archanam, I think there's a reverb I hear somewhere.
Someone's mic is on.
Someone's mic is on. Okay. Can you all hear me? Okay. So last week we covered how deity worship is a universal phenomenon because the term worship, what does it mean? Does anybody know what worship means? Anyone wants to help me out? Diane, what is the meaning of worship?
Well, without looking back in my notes, I'm just going to go with what my mind remembers.
Yes.
Worship is not connecting with your mind so much as connecting with your heart.
Okay, very nice.
Like wholly and completely.
Okay. Ramananda Prabhu, how do you define the word worship?
To me, it always sounds like glorifying, respecting. Like you would say, you all worship Mr. Priest or Mr. the Mayor. You all worship. The title is used, so it's something to acknowledge the qualities of a person or to glorify them. That's worship to me.
Okay. Thank you both for sharing. So the term worship, if you look in the dictionary, it'll say something like expression of reverence, honor, respect, devotion. These are some of the common words they will use in the dictionary to define worship. And in this yoga discussion we're having, deity worship, it has the same principle involved, where we honor and respect and revere the deity that we worship on a daily basis or on pilgrimages, because this nature to worship, it is a human nature that is all pervasive. If you look at all religions, all spiritual groups, all individuals, everyone is worshiping someone or something. Some, they say they don't believe in God, but then they're happy to worship their money, because the same expression of reverence, honor, respect is given to things, material objects, to meet certain material requirements that people have. So this worship is a very common phenomena that takes place in most people's lives and in most groups and spiritual or religious practices. So here we are discussing about Archanam, or deity worship. So first I would like to define that there is three kinds of deities that is commonly described in the yoga texts. So the three kinds of deities are immovable deities, that you go to different places, different temples around the world. The deities are generally made of 8 different what is the word I'm looking for? 8 different objects, such as earth, metal, and it's made out of stones. It can be made out of just an art, drawing. So many different ways deities are made, and also can be carved out of wood. These are all authenticated in the yoga text. And there are deities in the temple that are generally large and they're immovable. And those deities, you can decorate them, you can put ornaments on them, and you can worship them in more detailed manner. So those are called the immovable deities. And the second kind of deities that we worship are movable deities. For example, you have a temple, people have temples, and outside of the temple, they're not able to take those delicate deities out of the temple. Then they have smaller deities that they're able to engage in ceremonies with and different events. For example, if you want to put the deity to sleep, it'll be hard to put 20-foot deities to bed, if that's the relationship you want to have with the deities. So it's not possible. So every temple you go to in India, you'll notice they have big deities and then they have smaller deities. And it's the same form of the deity, but it's a smaller size, so it's more practical. So those are movable deities. And this is described in the yoga text where this particular types of deities. And then they have deities called the deities for festivals. There are deities made just for big festivals. And they're taken to different events. You'll notice around the world, they have deities, they have something called a chariot festival. And they'll take the deities out on a stroll through different cities and things like that. So these are 3 different types of deities that is worshipped. And another recommendation you will notice when you go to different temples, especially when you go to India, on the pilgrimages, we go to different temples and you get to see different deities. And each one of these deities have a very unique mood. Like for example, I know Daksha Devi is not online, but she was asking me about Kali. You'll see this female goddess where she doesn't have upper garments and she looks very ferocious. So there are deities like that who have certain moods. Like we worship Narasimha Dev, who is a deity of half man and half lion, is the deity of protection. So in this way, you will see most deities, they are carrying a certain mood. Like if you see a statue of Saraswati Devi, who is the goddess of learning, you will see there is books, and she's playing a veena, musical instrument, and her mood when you look at her, it's a studious mood. So in this way, all the deities that are made, they're yogic descriptions of what metals to use, what mood should the deities be in, and then there is a particular yoga text called the Shilpa Shastra, which is a text that details how to carve the deities. It's very interesting because anybody can just carve anything and say this is, a statue of Ganesh, for example. But in the Shilpa Shastras, those are special texts where it describes the different moods and the different types and the different metals and the different days and different times to start carving those beautiful deities. And those who carve the deities, they're called sthapatis. They are a unique group of people. They have to have a certain consciousness. Normally they come in a certain lineage of sculptures. And they are well versed in the art of Shilpa Shastra, and they also know the mood of each and every deity, and they actually meditate on the deity before they carve them, and they start at a certain time on a certain astrological calculations to make these deities. So it's a very interesting process of carving those deities. So now, getting back to the philosophy of this deity worship, why is it that in yoga texts they recommend deity worship? This Archanam, why is it recommended? The reason it's recommended is that although the divine is all-pervasive and omnipresent and omnipotent, it can be anywhere and everywhere. And it is everywhere. And in order to intensify and deepen that relationship with the divine then provides all the details of how to carve the deity and how to worship the deity, so that you can actually develop a personal relationship with the deity. This is the importance, to develop a personal relationship. Because God is all pervasive, He's everywhere. And then nothing happens because He's everywhere. Where do I start? Where do I begin? Should I start worshiping the trees because God is in the trees? So there's a lot of speculation that can happen. And so therefore, these yoga texts are recommending this process of self-discovery through Archanam, or deity worship. And the questions may also be asked, how do we know what deity is authentic, and that if we worship, that we can actually develop a relationship? The question can be asked. So just like I was mentioning, the $100 bill that you have, or the currency that we have, a $100 bill. $100 bill is just paper, right? And a piece of paper in your hand and a $100 bill, there is no much difference. But there's also a very vast difference. And that difference is that money, $100 bill, is authorized by the Reserve Bank of the US, and is authorized. So then when you take it to a store, it'll have value. So similarly, all these deities, when they're carved, there's a process that happens. And that process is called prana pratishtha. Means a person with sincere heart and devotion and love invokes the personality from the heart into the form of the deity. And because that individual worshipper, individual devotee has such deep love and sincerity and humility, that form of the divine appears in that deity, and thereby able to receive and communicate and interact with the person that's worshiping the deities. I don't know what the system is in the church when they put crosses, how they install them and how they worship them, or what is the procedure. But in the yoga text, we will see most temples, this process of prana pratishtha is generally a 3-week affair. Sometimes it's even longer. just to make sure that all processes, because the process is coming from Tantra, Mantra, and Yantra. There's three aspects of Prana Pratishtha, or installing the heart of the deity into the deity form. So this is also very detailed in the yoga texts, in the Shilpa Shastras, in the Pancharatras, and also in the Agamas. These are just giving you three names of the yoga text. Yes, Connie, you wanted to ask something.
You said three. Tantra, Mantra, what was the third one?
Is yantras.
Tantra.
There's very symmetrical measurements.
Thank you.
So there is a very beautiful text in the Vedas where it explains, some of you may not know, the cow is extremely sacred in Hinduism and also in the ancient yoga texts, the Vedas. They explain the cow is extremely sacred and that every part of the cow produces nectar, this milk, because the cows generally are known to be animals in the mode of goodness. And when you set them free, you'll notice they will go and roam and find the perfect herbs and perfect mixtures. And their body then makes this incredible, nourishing milk. And so this yoga text explains, even though the body of the cow produces nectar and milk through every part of its body, but the milk is only available through the udder of the cow. Similarly, even though the divine is all pervasive in everything and everywhere, one can still get into the habit of worshiping a deity with deep love and sincerity, and one will then be the recipient of the loving relationship one can have with the divine in the form of the deity. I remember I told you all a story a few classes ago about this deity of Sakshi Gopal, where he came and became a witness for this poor Brahmana. And that deity walked very, very far from northern India to southern India. And that deity is now still available. So what happens when our consciousness is evolved, whenever we see a deity, we are able to connect to that energy of that deity, so much so that we are actually able to see the personification of that deity. And in this particular text, this great saint, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he sees that deity of Sakshi Gopal, he does not see a statue, he does not see just the marble form of the deity. He explains what he is seeing and he describes it. And he says, "You are not a statue, my Lord. You are the personification of Krishna. You are personified Krishna." And that is the deity of Sakshi Gopal. And there's a beautiful description of that as well, how when our consciousness is evolved, when we are operating on this consciousness, transcendental consciousness, then we are able to see the divine in everything and everywhere. And especially when it comes to seeing the different deities that are being worshipped on a regular basis. And Yoga text further explains that if you worship the deity of your heart every single day, then the space that you have created to have this loving exchange with your deities, that space becomes a sacred space, and it becomes a place of pilgrimage for others. For example, many of you, when you come with me on the pilgrimage to India, we go to the Samadhi, the temple of Neem Karoli Baba, is one of the sages in Vrindavan. And you'll notice the energy when you go to that space is very, very strong. People go there, just sit there and shed tears of love. Because this is the place where he and his worshipable deity, Ram, had exchanged and had this loving relationship. This is a very common thing in all the temples that we go to India. These deities are being worshipped for thousands of years, hundreds of years. And that spiritual energy of loving exchange that is taking place, it is felt by all the visitors. And that is why thousands and thousands of people flock to these temples to see those deities and to be completely bathed and showered in that loving relationship. And you'll notice also in these temples, they give something called a prasad. Prasad means food that is cooked particularly for those deities. When you make something for your lover, you make it with deepest, with utmost care. And that food is so heavily infused with love. And when it is shared with the object of your love, and when someone tastes that food, then they also feel that love. And that is what the definition of prasad is. Where the sanctified food, which is sanctified by the love of an individual or individuals or devotees, and it is then offered to the object of their heart, and it becomes even more sanctified. And then when we honor that food, like when your mother cooks for you, right? Or your grandmother cooks for you. Most of you will say your mother is the best cook or your grandmother is the best cook. And the reason we say that is because mothers and grandmothers, they take a lot of time and focus and attention in the minute details of cooking that particular food for you. So there is a meditation that goes on for days and days, sometimes weeks. I know in America, when I got introduced to Thanksgiving, I was quite shocked to see how people plan Thanksgiving months and months in advance. How they will cook the turkey. I mean, I'm vegetarian, so I don't eat meat, but just to hear their description, and you can see how much contemplation and meditation and put into it. The potato gravy and the beans and the pumpkin pie, and they just really, really get into it, and they plan and prepare months in advance. What is happening is they're meditating on what they're going to cook. So the consciousness is becoming very, very condensed with an intent to cook something to feed all the guests that's coming to their house. And when the guests eat, then their heart is filled with so much satisfaction. And then they talk about all the leftovers, and then they talk about, after they finish the feast, how it lasted them all the way to Christmas, the good feelings, the good company, the good emotions, because there's so much meditation put into it. So everyone who has deities in their homes, they develop this relationship of intense love every single day. And that is felt by anyone that comes into that environment or eats that food that is cooked with so much love. So that is called prasadam. And every temple you go to, you will notice it has a different taste. It could be the exact same thing you're eating at a restaurant. But your mother's cooking will always be the best, or your grandmother's cooking, because the main ingredient in that cooking is spiritual love. I'm not sure what time it is. 9:35.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions or thoughts or reflections? Ramananda Prabhu.
Yes, what if I say that my deity is the holy name?
Sure. Because in the yoga text it is explained that the divine name, forms, qualities, and pastimes, they're all the same. When you talk and chant the names of the divine with such purity that the divine will appear in front of you, because those names have forms of qualities and pastimes. Because as soon as you get into the deity form of the Lord, whoever the object of your heart is, then what happens is you're getting into the metaphysical. Although you may be worshiping a physical object, but the energy and the consciousness is way above the physical, so it becomes metaphysical. And on that spiritual plane, when your deity is name, and that name definitely has a form, like Ramananda has a form. Except your name and form is, it's a little far apart, but when it's on the divine platform, it's the same. Because it's all pervasive, it's omnipresent, and it's omnipotent. Yes, Ramananda Prabhu.
Yes, because you shortly mentioned it, you were asking about the Christian church. I mean, the way I was worshipping in that kind of Catholicism, there was no concept of deity whatsoever. There's only cross and pictures of Jesus on the cross.
That's perfect.
Yeah, but there is nothing installed, there is nothing taught, there is nothing, there is no knowledge about these things, and there was no I never had the feeling of worshipping Jesus in that sense, And actually, I got feeling because it is an atmosphere which is completely scary, which is dark, heavy, and I think I got it. I got completely disgusted with all that, you see. And so because my understanding is that when you worship, it should, shushukam katamabhyam. There should be an atmosphere of happiness, joy coming out of all that, like you have that. Your joy, your light, you're elevated, but not us. We are down. Like you're bad. You're condemned. Because Eva bite or Adam bit in this apple, and we are all cursed. Like this kind of things. So I think I lost it there, and I have a very difficult time to relate. Even now, because also the problem is that, people tend to express so much status in these places of worship, and there is so much tension in that sense. I mean, I still have a hard time to deal with all that. I mean, I hope I don't offend anyone here by expressing all that. But that's my personal background, you see.
You'll notice, even when you go to the church, there is still that cross. You're worshiping the cross and pictures of Jesus. Maybe the education part sometimes can go missing, but the principle is still there, that there is worship of an object. And the same thing in yoga texts when we're worshiping deities of Hanuman, Krishna, Ram, Shiva. These are all deities. So that principle is there, and the purpose of it is to develop a personal relationship with the object of your heart. Somehow to share that love that you have in your heart for this deity. The principle is remaining. It's just maybe, it depends sometimes how we present it. And as I was mentioning, that the deities have different moods. If you go worship Durga or Kali, and you can see a big machete in her hand with skull necklace, and she's, she's only wearing a lower garment, and she's standing on her husband's body, and with her tongue sticking out. When you look at that form, what would you feel? So there's different deities that evoke different emotions. And the reason people worship, say, Krishna, for example, because he's the embodiment, that form of Krishna is a manifestation of the embodiment of transcendental, unconditional, eternal spiritual love. And people are looking for love, so that's why they worship Krishna. And there are people who worship Shiva, because he just looks very peaceful, seated in very deep meditation. And that's what they want in their life. So it depends what relationship we have. And the sculptures, the sthapatis, they are extremely well versed in carving those deities. They're incredible. These people are so intuitive and so knowledgeable. I mean, even when I was mentioning about the Shalagram Shilas, those unique insects in the Gandaki River, when you come to Nepal with me, you'll be able to see these insects under the water. They don't bite humans, but they are able to carve on these black stones in the river. They are special sthapatis. They carve the deities in those stones, and they're very popularly carved Sankha Chakra Gadha Padma. Sankha means the conch shell, Chakra the disc, Gada the club, the mace, and the lotus. They are able to take time and carve beautiful forms on the stones. And when they carve those stones, those deities will appear in those stones. And the stones are then worshipped by people around the world. So this whole process is very unique, the deity worship process. We all do it. We all worship deities. We all worship something, right? We worship our dog, we may worship money, we may worship people, we may worship something. So yoga is saying, why not worship the object of your love? Why not worship the object of your heart? So this is why Archanam, this island, is very heavily explored. There's so much content on this. Ramananda Prabhu, yes.
Yeah, last year when you were here, Rasada was phoning you. You remember that? And he was about to worship Shaligram Shila. And then you warned it that if you don't have the correct Shila, then your life may be destroyed. And anyway, there was a whole discussion there. I found that very interesting. So deity worship seems to be very individual. And
it's personal, yes.
Personal, yes. And I also want to say, you see it must be very much related. Like the way you were explaining, it's so attractive. Like that, everyone wants to, is interested, he wants to approach a deity. So, like you are here, like authority or like guru. So that's, Krishna is, and it makes all the difference, Then you become attracted to do deity worship. You see what I mean?
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
very kind, Ramananda Prabhu.
No, it's not kind, it's the truth. I mean, it's the truth. Otherwise, I lose it very quickly because, like I said, with my background, I cannot relate to it, But when you hear from a person who has such in-depth, not only knowledge, but also you feel it. your attraction, you feel your experience, like you're saying with this deity in Vrindavan, the Karoli Baba there, that you feel that you have experienced that you have tasted the love, you taste the difference in the prasadam, and so I mean all this makes deity worship come out. But otherwise, I agree with Lord Chaitanya that this age is not the age about deity worship. It's about Harinam. So that's where I am at in my personal. I don't get myself to elevate to that state of consciousness. I mean, I'm happy to go to the temple. I will do things, but I feel there's so much stuff there that I cannot relate to, and so I'm very thankful and yeah.
Thank you, Ramananda Prabhu.
It's very unique. Thank you.
Clementine wants to share something.
I'd love to share. I love everything you said. The all-pervasiveness of God being everywhere and in everything, and the honor and the worship that everybody is giving, the heart, like in the carving, as their thought process and as the love in their heart made that wood and made that deity come alive to them, and therefore it goes on. And I find it so interesting to see how specific you are in your teachings. And I, being in the Christian scriptures, I can see the same thing in Leviticus. Everything was so pronounced, so it's the same.
Yes.
And I think that's the wonderful thing about this. That's why I love your teachings, because I can understand them, and yet it broadens my understanding for other people, for other thoughts, and I'm very appreciative. But I also have to go, so that's why I was waiting. I have to be somewhere, and I have someone at my front door.
Thank you so much, Clementine, for sharing.
Okay.
So I'll tell you a small story. How many minutes do I have? Someone's clocking us? So I'll tell you a small story. This is a story where I grew up in the monastery. There was a temple maybe about 5 kilometers from, because in India they say kilometers, so it's about 5 kilometers from where, and this was the deity of Jagannath. Jagannath means, they call it the Lord of the universe. And his brother Baladev and his sister Subhadra. So in that temple, it's very interesting, fascinating, because it's surrounded in a Muslim neighborhood. And they don't believe in the form of God, because they believe that God is formless. But they all have a tendency to go to the temple every evening. That's where they go, and they eat prasad. And one day, one of the villagers went, and this is a true story. It's not something that happened during my time. So he went and he broke into the temple and he stole the necklace of the deities. He didn't know what necklaces he stole, but he stole some necklaces and he went off. And the pujaris, or the priests that came next morning, they see that the temple was vandalized, and they were trying to go and worship the deities and put some jewelry on them, and they saw that the jewelry was missing. So at that time, this villager, he thought he got away with it. But at night, in his sleep, Balaram, Jagannath's older brother, in that form, in that deity form, he came to that man, he was sleeping, and he slapped him around really bad. How dare you come into my house and steal my things? And he slapped him really bad, like really bad, like, you shouldn't have stole my sister's necklaces. His complaint was like, you could have taken my necklaces, but how dare you take my sister's necklaces? And he was slapped around in his dream. And when he woke up from his dream, he literally saw his face all swollen up because he got smacked around. And he says, you better give my sister's necklaces back. And I remember we were little kids, and this story of this man, there was a picture of his face all blown up and a little poster plastered everywhere. He's a thief. He's the one that stole the necklace. And it was very interesting because as a little kid, I was like, whoa, I got to watch out for those deities. I better not steal anything from them because, you get smacked around. I don't know how that feels, So it was a very interesting thing how when deities are worshipped with so much love, that they're present. And when people mess with them, they may not always come and smack you around at night, but sometimes, yeah, they will. That was like a story that I know of the person, right? And I'll tell you one more story then. This is a story of Narasimhadev. There is a big, beautiful rock-carved, stone-carved statue of Narasimha, the half man, half lion, the deity of protection. And they got him in that region because there was a lot of dacoits. In India, those old days, there was a lot of dacoits. So he was brought in for protection. And, he looked extremely ferocious. I remember when I used to look at him, I could not even look at him because he just looked so angry. As a kid, we used to go visit, and I just could not look. And the pujari, the priest that used to worship that Narasimha deity, what he used to do is he used to cook the offering and he would offer it to the deities, like his lunch. And generally, when the deities are eating, you notify them like, knock, knock, here I come, People don't just walk into your room without knocking and ringing the bell. So this pujari, this priest, he would just always walk into the temple after lunch and just never knock while the deity was in the middle of his meals. So this deity came to him in the middle of his sleep. He was sleeping in his room, and the deity just in his sleep went up to him and just tapped him on the shoulders and said, could you please knock on the door next time you come in while I'm eating? It's a little annoying that you just show up, barge into the door. This was in the temple, right? And that pujari, that priest, he shared that story next day. I know that priest because he used to live in Atlanta. And now he's moved to Arizona. So I remember him sharing this story. It's very interesting when you worship the deities with so much love, they actually are present for you to have that relationship with you and to be by your side and to reciprocate with you in a very personal way. So any other questions before we end? Those are the only 2 stories I'll tell you for today, but there are so many stories. Historical stories, more past stories, and then recent stories. Any thoughts, any reflections? Okay. So thank you all very much for joining us on the Heartspace. Namaste, everyone.
Hare Krishna.
Namaste.
Namaste, Hare Krishna.
Nitai, where do you end it?